Our guest today is the chairman of the Regional Transportation Authority. At the RTA, he is responsible for overseeing the second largest public transportation system in our country. The great philosopher Plato would call our guest today a model citizen who exemplifies the mission of the City Club of Chicago. And here's why. Over the last 40 years, 4-0, he has answered the call for public service time and time again, most recently chairing the Reform Board at McPeer, and now the RTA, among others. Prior to his public service at the RTA, he founded, and for 22 years, was CEO of a company that grew to become listed on the New York Stock Exchange and the largest property investor in Chicagoland. Fortunately for him and us, he sold it in 2006. Today, okay, Paul, I want to make sure you got that, 2006. Today, he serves on the boards of two other large New York Stock Exchange companies. I know of no one who has served the public in more important volunteer jobs than our guest today. He devotes nearly all of his professional time to charitable and civic organizations. He has chaired the Metropolitan Planning Council and serves on the executive committee of the Lurie Children's Hospital, as well as on the boards of many other civic, educational, and charitable institutions. More importantly, or most importantly for us at the City Club, he has been a longtime member and very helpful friend to the City Club. Now, he did one other thing which really merits his intelligence, shows how intelligent he is. He married up, and his wife is here today, Wheezy. Wheezy, thank you for being with us today. Let's give her a round of applause. And equal to that, her son, Ted. Ted, thank you for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, John Gates. John?
Well, Jay, thank you very much. I'm just a lame duck. I didn't know that I'd actually died. That would look that was like a eulogy. Better than my eulogy. But at any rate, before we start, I'd like to say what an honor and a pleasure, usually, it's been to be chairman of the RTA. In no small measure, this is due to a much improved board and a very hard-working staff, led now by our interim director, Leanne Redden. And I'd like all of those folks to stand and be recognized because you do a great job. I was going to acknowledge Wheezy, my wife, and Ted, my son, but Jay beat me to it.
Give him a round of applause anyway.
They have put up with a lot with all these public jobs over all these years. Moving on to the RTA, today we have a lot to cover. But before that, a little background about the RTA. We provide financial oversight, funding, and planning for the three operating transit agencies in Northeast Illinois. That covers Cook, Will, Lake, DuPage, Kane, and McHenry counties, and comprises about 70% of Illinois' population. We help about 2 million riders a day get to work, to school, and to access the other many benefits of the Chicago region. Our transit system is the second largest in the country after New York, if you count passenger miles, or the third largest after New York and LA if you count rides. LA has a huge bus system that's been put in place in the last few years. It is the only agency that's charged with looking at the region holistically from a transit perspective. Our budget this year is about $4.3 billion. About 2/3 of that goes to operations, about 1/3 of that goes to capital, and we need much more capital, as I'll get into in a second. Our principal operating subsidy, it was a regional sales tax that was enacted in 1974. About 30% of that comes from the city, about 70% comes from the suburbs, and that pretty much mirrors the demographics and employment of this region. However, when you include paratransit, transit for the disabled, well over half of the sales tax is, the regional sales tax is spent on city transit. And in other words, in any given year, 250 million to 300 million is sent from the suburbs to the city to subsidize City of Chicago transit. Why? Why would the suburbs send this kind of money to the city to subsidize transit? Because long ago, they and this region recognized that transit benefits everyone. But the suburbs also wanted representation on a board that oversaw how the money was spent and how the service was distributed. Because of this regional funding and these regional operations, the RTA board is truly a regional enterprise, appointed by the region's elected officials. All the appointments are made to the 15 members of the board are made by the elected officials. 5 by the mayor of the city of Chicago, 5 by the suburban members of the Cook County Board, and 5 by each one of the Collier County chairmen. As you can see, this is truly a regional forum, directly accountable to local governments who are closest to the people and who are elected by the people. The chairman of the board, the 16th member, is elected by a vote of at least 75% of the appointed members of that board. For the last 4 years, that chairman has been me. And now that I've checked into the Lame Duck Motel, I can make a few candid comments and observations. The RTA has 5 major responsibilities: to approve a balanced budget, to provide regional oversight, to provide a series of regional services, to provide interagency planning and coordination, and to generate additional funding for transit. Although it definitely lacks most of the tools necessary to perform these functions optimally, we have achieved much in the last few years. By far the most difficult of these tasks is balancing the regional budget. This is not for the faint of heart. As you know, the budget process is the most contentious work handled by the RTA. It is when the CTA, Metra's, and PACE's self-interest is most self-evident. It takes months of often acrimonious negotiation each year. But I'm proud of our results recently. For the first time in over a decade, all operating budgets are balanced and paid for out of current and recurring revenues. This is an enormous feat that's taken a lot of tremendous work from the service boards as well as many others. Our pension funds are very well funded for now and well into the future. And as a result of all this and many other initiatives, we have achieved a AA bond rating with a favorable outlook, which is by far the highest of any major government unit in Illinois. Another task is the agency must provide oversight of the service boards. To this end, we recently we were the first to get to the bottom of the Clifford affair at Metra and provide hearings and audits that brought to light all of the major facts. We've examined the impact of the financial impact of the CTA's Ventra rollout and provided a number of initiatives to make that better. And we investigated Metra's polar vortex issues last winter, and clearly that was a problem of deferred maintenance more than anything else. We provide at RTA a number of regional services. We operate the ADA paratransit certification program that serves individuals with disabilities. We operate the travel training programs throughout the region to serve older adults and those with disabilities. We operate the only regional consolidated trip planner that provides wayfinding information for anyone who wants to use the entire system, not just one of the CTA Metro and Base. As a result, we operate an online and telephonic travel information center that receives 5.3 million calls per year, plus a greater number of online inquiries. We operate the customer service center, which serves 550,000 individuals per year when reduced fare programs and free ride programs. We operate RTRANS, the online regional transit database. And we operate the Regional Transit Benefit Program, which provides pre-tax fare payment for the employees of over 2,000 companies in the metropolitan Chicago area. We also provide funding for a variety of regional initiatives. For instance, the RTA helped fund the signage you see at transit stops. It tells you when the next bus and train are arriving. Another good example is the work we did with Orland Park to transform the area around the metro station there from an industrial site to a mixed-use town center. We initiated legislation that requires a universal fare card, or universal fare medium as we call it, and now we have it. Today, I can take my ATM card, which has a chip embedded in it, as virtually all of them will eventually, and most of them do today. And I can tap on any CTA or PACE bus, and using the magnetic strip on the back, I can buy a ticket on any Metro train. You don't need a Ventra card, you don't need any other card, just an ATM card with a chip embedded in it. It's the best system and only true universal fare card system in the country, and we have it today. We also look for new revenues without raising taxes. That involves better, smarter funding from Washington and collecting what we are owed. We created the the National Get America to Work Coalition, which is playing an influential role in drafting the next federal transportation funding bill, which will be over $300 billion. And the current bill expires this summer, and we expect the debate to really get underway this fall. Last year, the Chicago RTA, initiated the first federal congressional transit caucus. Believe it or not, there had never been a caucus in the Senate or the House that focused on transit. It now has 33 members and is growing very rapidly. Locally, as you've seen in the news, the RTA is aggressively litigating years of sales tax dodging by over 100 large corporations. They have siphoned off hundreds of millions of dollars from our transit system. These companies and their employees use our transit, our schools, our police, our fire, our social services, but they've been playing games to avoid paying for them, and we don't think that's acceptable. Now, we could do much better. Despite these accomplishments, there is a lot that needs to be improved. We need ethics reform. The RTA over the years, and particularly in the last year, has issued numerous white papers specifying a number of different ethics reforms. In January, we converted these to specific pieces of legislation, which has been very favorably received by the legislature and will be the subject of hearings starting tomorrow. By far, our biggest financial problem is the $20 billion of deferred maintenance we have throughout the system. Simply put, our system is wearing out. To minimize accidents and failures that we have seen a lot of recently, it will begin to gradually run slower. How are we going to pay for this? How are we going to get this system back in shape? Illinois is broke. Increased federal funding is very questionable. But the RTA has the ability, because of its increased credit rating and better finances, to issue billions of new bonds if the legislature will permit it. I'm asking them to do so and do so in this session, so we can begin the process of rebuilding the system. We can no longer rely on the state or the federal government to provide the new capital dollars, but we can do it at home. The RTA should become the central bonding agency for all the service boards. Separate service board bonding has been costly, and in the case of Metra and PACE, non-existent. The RTA is rated AA with a favorable outlook by all major credit agencies, while the city and the state's plummeting credit ratings have made CTA borrowing more costly than if the RTA issued bonds on their behalf. Doing so would save the CTA tens of millions of dollars over the course of those bonds. We also need to strengthen our financial oversight. The budgets provided by the service boards lack the detail needed for making proper financial decisions. The RTA board should be granted the ability to revise budgets on a line item basis. All capital projects should be subjected to a cost-benefit analysis. And the RTA needs real-time access to the service board's financial data. Now we get it months in arrears. Over the last 40 years, transit funding in our region has become convoluted and confusing. This picture you see on the right, or see behind me, is actually the Cliff Notes version of the funding formulas we have to support transit in our region. I've seen bowls of pasta that look more organized and are easier to understand. We need to radically simplify the funding formulas and tie them to performance. There are many, many more improvements that deserve mention, but time today does not permit, and it starts to get pretty wonkish beyond this. But over the years, hundreds of what the mayor lovingly calls propeller heads have written hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pages on how we can do better transit in our region. I'll save you the reading. The only thing they agree on is that if you design the system today, the governance system today, you wouldn't do it the way we do it now. Only Springfield can fix that. And in my mind, they have three simple choices. One, perpetuate the existing system. Two, consolidate all four transit agencies into one. Or three, give the RTA the tools to perform its mission. Frankly, the first one is unacceptable, and there's a growing consensus throughout our region that we can do better than what we have. Frankly, the second one is not politically doable. Our region's elected officials are not sufficiently unified to pass a measure such as that. So let's give the RTA the tools it needs to do what it was asked to do, but never given the authority to do. And I think Chicagoland's taxpayers and transit riders would benefit enormously, and thank you. And I thank you for listening, and then we can open it up for questions.
Well done. If you have a question, raise your hand. Our back there.
No questions? It's easy to understand. I know.
It's in the process. That's right. By the way, this is the first. Just for the record, Plato was mentioned for the first time in City Club history by President. Never, ever has it ever been mentioned before.
The philosopher? I thought it was Play-Doh, like the stuff you had at...
When you're a lame duck, who cares?
Right, exactly.
No reason to stall out the questions. Just hand them up. Art is long and time is fleeting. All right, here we go. All that for two lousy questions. All right, here we go. Clint Sabin, where are you? Notice they're way in the back. Here you go. Remember, here's the question, and good printing. How much additional fare revenue has come into the service boards as a result of the rollback of the Blagojevich-created Senior Ride Free program?
a very good question. I'm not sure of the exact answer, but there are probably people here who do know that. It's tens of millions of dollars. Donna, do you have a number on that?
30 million?
Well, the off-the-cuff answer is about $30 million per year, which is very significant. To give you an idea in terms of bonding, if you take any dollar of additional revenue and multiply by 20, that's about what the bonds we can issue for each that dollar. So that number is about, $600 million of bonds that we could issue, much of which Don Orsino, for instance, would love to have.
You're right.
Don, by the way, is the executive director of Metra, and he's doing a terrific job in bringing that organization into the 21st century. So he deserves a round of applause.
Spoke her last week. All right, Michael Sutton, where are you?
Right here.
Michael, you need penmanship. What's the first word? Bond?
Bond.
A-V-E?
No, B-O-N-D-S. Bonds are debt.
Bonds are, oh, now I got it. I can handle the rest. Bonds are debt. By the way, Mr. Blagojevich never understood that. How do you plan to pay off the bonds?
Right now, as I mentioned, for the first time in over a decade, our operating revenues are paid for out of current and recurring revenues. We are also picking up significant revenue growth through increases in sales tax, and frankly, from the litigation against the sales tax scofflaws, who are now beginning to start pay their taxes as they're brought into the spotlight. Those revenues, part of that growth, can be used to pay debt service and pay amortization on those bonds, pay the principal payoff on those bonds over the next typical 30-year issue. Because of the lead time and the infrastructure that needs to be replaced in our system, you can't spend all the money right up front. If you did, let's say, $1 billion bond issue, just to use an example, that money could not be spent for more than 5 years. So gradually it will go out as gradually these revenues grow, and you take a piece of that growth and devote it to debt service. And depending on who the ultimate agency is that uses the capital, their piece of the debt service, or their piece of the sales tax growth would be used to pay the debt service. In other words, if the CTA used half of that, then half of the debt service would be deducted from their sales tax growth.
Okay.
And with a AA tax-exempt bond rating, we can issue a lot of debt today very, very cheaply.
Okay. Well, we have two questions pretty similar, so we'll put them together. Steve Schlickman, where are you? Steve, raise your hand. Now that you're a professor, you look like the pressure is beginning to get to you. I understand that. And you heard that, Mark? And Carl Fry from Com Smith. Where are you, Carl? Right there. Okay. What is the one most important change to the RTA authority that should be made by the legislature? And following up on that, what things do you need from the legislature other than bonding authority? Any state reps or state senators here? Well, now you can really go.
I think they're all hard at work or on their way to Springfield. They're in session. I mentioned in my remarks a number of different tools that we need. I would say probably the most important is the ability to analyze and revise, other than the bonding issue, and the ethics issues. Ethics is number one. We no longer want to have the kind of cloud that hung over Metra and others this summer. I personally was involved in the removal or resignation of 10 service board members this summer. A lot of it you'd never heard about, but it was enormously time consuming. The investigations leading up to that were enormously difficult, and not all the reasons were ethical, but many were. And I think those reforms would avoid a lot of that, which is wrong and very time-consuming and very diverting from our mission. So beyond that, I would probably say the ability to analyze and for the RTA board to make line item revisions to the budgets. Right now, we really have the only way we can revise a budget is through what we call the nuclear option. And that is, we either have to pass all the budgets, CTA, Metro, and PACE, as presented, or not pass them. And if you don't pass them by the end of the year, we are required by law to shut off our funding to the CTA, Metro, and PACE. And what that means is by February or March in any given year, those systems shut down. That is not the way to operate a business. And we, not last year, but the year before, came very close to that. We approved the budget in January, and we were days away from cutting off funding from all the service boards. And it was only that nuclear option that brought us to compromise. That is not the way to run a railroad, right, Don? So I think having that kind of the ability to analyze on a real-time basis and revise on a line item basis by a vote of a regional board is probably the most important sort of technical improvement we can make.
You probably covered it, but we have one other question dealing with the ethics and the influence of politics. Is ethics the number one issue facing the RTA? And
Well, I think when this legislation is passed, it will be, at least have the legislative platform to make it far more transparent and far less political than it has in the past. I think, frankly, because of all of the resignations and all of the attention this issue has received, there are very few ethical issues out there that I'm aware of today. But I could not have made that statement a year ago.
okay, well, we have a bonus question. Mary Sue Barrett, you know, Clout has his privileges, so here we go. Mary Sue. Whoa, good question to go out with. This is going to be good. Good question, Mary Sue. Critics of expanding RTA's authority say that the legislature gave it more several years ago. Not enough changed. Tell us how it could be different this time. Results? How could it be different this time?
Effectively, what the 2008 legislation did a lot of things, including providing more revenues. But in terms of governance, it expanded the RTA's responsibilities and mission, but didn't really do much to give it the authority to execute that mission. And that's why we are where we are today. A lot of the suggestions that I mentioned earlier would get us in a position where we can better execute the responsibilities that we were given in that and other legislation. And that's sort of really the mismatch that we are focused on today.
All right. Round of applause. Marty Gish.